So welcome to our iSpring webinar series where we discuss e-learning trends, share tips and tricks, and highlight client success stories. So my name is Kate. I'm a community manager at iSpring and your moderator for today's session. And today's webinar titled Unlocking Active Learning, the Power of the Flipped Classroom will provide a host of insights on using the flipped classroom strategy to enhance student engagement and improve learning outcomes. So by the end of the session, you will leave with some practical tools and ideas to make your classroom interactions more meaningful. So let's start. Um, Let me introduce you to our dear guest and your presenter for the day, Dr. Lyndon Walker, an award-winning educator and researcher with over 20 years of experience. So, hi, Lyndon. How are you doing today?
Hey, excellent. Great to see everyone jumping into the chat already.
Yeah, I'm so excited too.
And welcome, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. This is actually a repeat of a webinar that I gave for iSpring back in December, but for the Asia Pacific zone. It's a pretty different time of the day for me, and from the looks of it from all of you. Get me talking about something that I'm very passionate about, which is active learning and really making the most of teaching, whether it is in a school classroom, higher education, where I've had a lot of experience, or even post-education kind of vocational zone. So today, what we're trying to do, we want to start off, I really want to get to know you a little bit. And we've got the chat function there. People are making use of it already, which is excellent. I'm going to talk a little bit about the what and the why of the flipped classroom. So what is it, and why is it a good thing? Why should we be trying to teach in this style? I'm going to talk about my experience of taking a subject and fully flipping the classroom, and the research that I did following that on student outcomes. And then we're going to have some tools and some tips for interactive teaching. This is very much a top-down kind of approach today. There is going to be a follow-up at some stage in the future, 2 weeks time for the Asia Pacific, but that might not be the best time for all of you. And that's going to be more of a bottom-up, looking at lots of very specific examples. And so it's almost like some of you are magically reading ahead in the text there. So what I would love is just in the text, if you haven't already told me where you are today, if you want to tell me where you are, and in particular also what you'd like to learn today. So hopefully we've got quite a lot of content here, so hopefully everyone's going to learn at least a little something. That's certainly the goal of any presentation that I do, is that everyone takes at least a little something away. But yeah, so lots of people jumping in there. Looks like a very, very international audience. And I think this is probably a pretty good time for quite a lot of time zones. Okay, so how does flipped classroom work? We're definitely going to do. It's going to be a little bit on the tools later on. Probably more on the next webinar session on the a lot of those very specifics. Someone mentions recording themselves for YouTube videos, so we'll definitely talk about pros and cons. Okay, excellent. If you haven't finished typing in there, please do carry on. I have the chat here scrolling in front of me, and I will certainly be keeping an eye on it. Hopefully not getting too distracted by it, though. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from New Zealand. I now live in Australia. I've been involved in education for more than 20 years. A lot of that's been in higher education, although I have done consulting and research that has been in both primary and secondary school levels as well. I'm now at the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, so I'm involved with researching how to better train GPs, which, and depending on what country you are, you might know as primary care doctors or family physicians. On the side of that, I have a YouTube channel where I talk about a little bit of education, a lot of AI stuff. I'm an academic board member, I'm a consultant, do all sorts of stuff. Had multiple teaching awards from the years when I was lecturing. OLT Citation is a national teaching award here in Australia. Got a couple of pictures there. So there's some of the local kangaroos. Those kangaroos are actually at the local secondary school. There's a bush area. They live in there. And if you're lucky enough, you can snap a picture. The other picture there is my cat Connor, and there's going to be a story about him a little bit later, and he's helping my seedlings to grow. So there's going to be a little bit more about him later. Okay, so before we get into Flipped Classroom, we've got this poll, and so I'd love to know how much experience you have in terms of this Flipped Classroom teaching. And that's going to help me to try and tailor quite where we're pitching this. So wow, this is a really fast answering cohort. I'm very impressed with how quickly everyone is getting into the chat and now answering these. Okay, and it looks like we have a pretty decent chunk of people here who have either had not really any experience or only a little experience. And so that's excellent. We can definitely cater to that. Hopefully for those of you who are more experienced, there's still going to be some little tidbits and examples and things you might be able to take away, either for your own teaching, or I mean, if you are one of those flipping pros, then hopefully you'll be able to maybe take some of these ideas away to help be an ambassador for this within your institution. Okay, so what is the flipped classroom? So we've got this diagram here from the University of Texas, and I've done quite a search a number of times to find the diagram that I really love. And there's none that I perfectly like, but this kind of exemplifies most of what we're going for. And that is that we are trying to change the paradigm of the in-class versus out-class activities. So what's happening in the class versus what's happening outside of the class. And when this is often described, people will talk about, oh, well, you shift the lectures into videos. And that particular bit I would push back against, because I think if you're doing a really good job of the flipped classroom, then those online pre-class materials are also going to be interactive. They're also going to be engaging. It's not just watching videos. There's more to it than that. And that's where a lot of the diagrams and certainly the basic descriptions about the flipped classroom will often fall down. But outside of this, I think this captures the concept pretty well. So that transmission, the one-way transmission of information, where we're trying to get the student to take things on board, we're trying to shift as much of that as we can into pre-class, a little bit post-class, but particularly pre-class, so that when I have the student in the class with me, I can spend as much time as I can interacting, engaging. So I'm not just standing there and transmitting information. Instead, I am going to be interacting with them, getting them doing things, giving them feedback as much as possible, really maximizing that in-class time with them so that it's not the first time they're encountering material. They've already had some video or activity or basics beforehand. And then in class, they are going to have more activity, reinforcement, get feedback, correction where needed. And then that can then flow into post-class. They can do more reinforcement, but that post-class is not going to be the first time that they are doing activities. It's not the first time that they are trying to attempt things. They've already had that opportunity to do that before class and then during class with you. Okay, it seems to be a few people with connection problems. We are definitely recording this, so we will be able to provide a link to the recording. Okay, so this slide really just reiterating what we had there in that diagram. So that information transmission, if it's going to be one-sided in one way, predominantly we're shifting that to being pre-class. In class, we want to have interaction between the learners and the instructor, and then post class is going to be reinforcement rather than a first time practicing. That very old paradigm of the teacher or the lecturer got up, talked at the students, told them some stuff, and said, now for homework, go away and do some practice. That's really problematic because the students aren't going to get feedback and they're not going to get good correction most of the time. For different disciplines and different domains and different levels of learner, the specifics of this might be a bit different. So there's not one specific way for doing this. I'm going to share how I went about it. And certainly there's going to be lots of other ways depending on who you're teaching, how you're teaching, levels and things like that. So why do we want to teach like this? We want to maximize the value of that face-to-face time. In most learning environments, and particularly in higher education, where I've spent a lot of time, you don't get that much time face-to-face with your learners. So doing something where it could be done other ways outside of the classroom is not going to be the best use of that time. What I want to do is I want to get the most interactive environment that I can. I want to be able to give the most feedback. I want to have students to have the most opportunity to be able to ask questions, interact with each other, interact with me. It's actually a really great way for adding flexibility to your content and your delivery as well, because that in class time, you can use it to try and address where there's particular challenges rather than having to cover all of the content. If there's particular areas that have been identified from the pre-class activities, then either the students can come in and they can say, we did the pre-class activities, we don't quite understand this particular bit of calculus. Can you kind of reiterate and go over that? Or you might have some quizzing, or you might have some kind of formative assessment where the students are going to do that, and you'll actually get to see how they're performing, and that can help guide you on what's the best use of what we're doing in the classroom today. So that's very much the pros, and that is what we're trying to achieve. There are criticisms, and there's a few of them. Some of them I think are reasonable, some of them I think are less reasonable. So one which I think is quite reasonable, and it's going to vary a lot depending on who you teach and where you teach, is the idea of the digital divide. So there may be situations where students don't necessarily have access to computers and learning management system and things like that when they're away from your learning institution. It's going to be really important to be aware of that. Even within the classroom, if we are doing, say, something with QR codes and phones, or we're doing some sort of online polling or something like that, making sure that there is sufficient devices with the across all of the students so that they are all going to be able to be involved. So being aware of that digital divide, definitely a valid criticism and something to be aware of, but something that you can potentially address. You would address it in terms of how you plan your materials and your activities, what kind of technology you use, what kind of technology you expect. Some students might struggle with self-directed responsibility. So there's more onus now on the students to be doing work before they're coming into class. And I'm kind of not fully convinced that's a reasonable criticism. And it depends where we're at. If we were talking at, say, primary school students, secondary school students, maybe that's reasonable. Once we hit higher education, where we have adult learners, people that are going to be doing your course, going out into the workforce, really they should be at a stage that they can take responsibility, they can self-direct some learning. But again, you need to think about your students, and you need to think about how that's going to work best for them. There could be things around neuro-inclusion, neurodiversity, ADHD that you also need to take account for. Um, Okay, so we've got someone that can't see the slides. Hopefully most of you can see the slides. Maybe just get confirmation on that. Um, there is increased workload for the students. Uh, so refresh your browser, please, person that couldn't see the slides. Everyone else can. Awesome. Thank you for the feedback, everyone. So there is some increased workload and cognitive load on students. And so this is important. And this is also important where you think about the other subjects that they are studying and whether those other subjects are also doing this. So when I first kicked off flipped classroom learning, I was the only one of the only ones in my institution doing this. It was good 10, at least 10 years ago. Um, I didn't have to worry as much about the workload that other subjects were placing on the students week to week, because it wasn't a case of everyone doing flipped classroom. If everyone is going to be adopting flipped classroom, then you need to be really aware of how much pre-class work the total load for students is, not just you. There's also some initial workload for the educator as well. So if you are going to have additional resources you are building for the students, that's going to take some work for you as well. The other criticism that I see, and I've kind of got a quote here that exemplifies it, is people that think flipped classroom is terrible, largely because they're doing a really bad job of it. So I would hear things like, well, I made a 3-hour video, why didn't they watch it? And for me, I mean, as much as I love statistics, 3-hour video, that's a bit of a stretch. So really thinking about the kinds of resources that students are going to watch and that are interactive and do have um, do have kind of meaning and that they can see value of. I think that's a really big thing, is that with really any education, the more that you can highlight and the learners can see the value, and coming there to that question about how many students actually do homework, if they see value, many more will. And again, there might be differences between school and higher education, but if the students can see the value, then they are more likely to get engaged in this. And awesome to see someone in the chat who loves stats. Okay, so the subject that I'm going to be talking about was called survey research methods. I inherited the subject. It had issues with success and retention, and it had low student satisfaction. So the students didn't like it, and they weren't doing well. In terms of the content in there was a bit of survey construction, so writing surveys, producing them, both written kind of, I mean, it was just bridging where we went from online into from paper into online. So we did get into the online survey tools, and then some analysis of survey data as well. And these are things that are really taught with lots of practice and feedback. If you think about writing a survey, and any of you who have done any kind of research with surveys will have realized that actually trying to capture data correctly, accurately, in a way that someone doing the survey understands, there's a lot of skill to that, and it takes practice and different paradigms, different times that you're doing this are going to be different. The types of questions, the way that you ask them, depending on the audience, depending on what you're trying to find out, is going to vary a lot. And so it's not a case of just saying, in order to write a question about age, here's the categories, because it's going to depend. If I'm doing a tech survey, then that's going to be, and it's aimed at under 40s, I'm going to use very different age brackets from if I was surveying retirees. So there's going to be lots of different kind of very paradigm specific things that I need to account for. So I inherited the subject. It had been taught very, very traditionally. So I guess you are going to have to suffer Gen X references and jokes through this presentation. If you don't recognize the picture there, it's from the teacher from the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And if you haven't seen that movie, you could probably even just find the clip of the classroom And you'll see that and you will know exactly what I'm on about. And so I took the subject, and it was a really great opportunity for me to try something a little bit more dramatic, uh, because it really needed a lot of work. And so I decided that I was going to go 100% flipped approach. And I think this is quite important as well. I've seen people who will think, oh, I'm going to dip my toe in. I'm going to do week 5 as a flipped week. And in my experience and having been a learning designer and a curriculum developer for people, um, this generally doesn't work because you haven't set a culture of this flipped learning. To me, this is the style for the subject for the term or the semester. It generally isn't as great for just a one-off time because the students or the learners just get a bit confused. It's all of a sudden doing something really different. Um, so I moved to 100%, and then I've got some asterisks there. This was pre-COVID, and I think some things in terms of in-classroom, remote, hybrids, so some of the learning paradigms in some places have changed a little bit, but hopefully there is a bit of carryover. Okay, so how I did it. So we're going to have a look at a couple of different things, and there's my cat, little Connor again. And if you ever need to engage in cat management, box on the desk is an excellent way of managing the assistant there. And there is still a story coming about him. Okay, excellent. So we're seeing a couple of people mentioning their experiences already. So for me, the most important point, and you could say this about any kind of teaching in any class, but I think for flipped classroom, particularly where it's not the norm and where it's new to the learners, day one is the most vital day. And so one thing that I made a really big deal about every single time, day one, explaining what flipped classroom learning was, why I was doing it, how we were doing it. So being really, really explicit. I'm going to be teaching you in this fashion. Over time, I had both research evidence from other research and from my own delivery that I could show the students. Here's what happened when I changed from flipped classroom. And in a couple of slides' time, I'll show you some of the stats. So being really explicit of this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And then discussing the expectations and also really highlighting that value to the students. And in that time, I would also kind of, within reason, find out from the students what they wanted. Very much like today, I asked you what you wanted to get out of the session. And this is tertiary environment, so as adult learners, maybe a little bit of a difference to school, but even at school, I think this is reasonable. Giving that sense of agency by saying, what do you want out of this course? For some things that you teach, they might be, and I saw someone's commenting about nursing skills there, that's going to be very regulated and very regulated and very prescriptive. There are things that would absolutely have to be done at specific standards. You can't just have the students deciding what bits of nursing they learn and what bits they don't. But you can still give them a sense of agency of what are the kinds of things that you want to cover here. And sometimes you will get some really good comments and things that you might incorporate into your course. So day one, students are on board, shown them the value, discuss the expectations. Something I've found over time as well is that rather than me telling them the expectations, I would tell them the delivery and why. And then I would get them to set the expectations. And I would get them to set the expectations about me. And so how quickly I might reply. And obviously if they're not giving sensible suggestions, we disregard them. But I would give them set some expectations about me and then set some expectations about themselves. And it was interesting because they always set higher expectations for themselves than what I would have asked for. So I might have kind of said, if I was setting it, said, oh, well, as long as they've kind of done 3/4 of the pre-class, and they would come up with, well, all of us will do 100% of the pre-class activities. So they were actually setting higher expectations for themselves. And then once they'd set them for themselves, I found that they adhered to them much more. AI tools is an excellent question that we'll come to at the end. I have lots to say about AI, probably more than the hours that we have here today. Okay, here's Connor again. And so pre-class activities. If we're having video, we want to make sure that they're shortened to the point. They don't have to be TikTok length, but don't use 3-hour videos. Even very complex things can normally be boiled down to, maybe it's 10, 15, 20 minutes for something that's particularly complex. But even then with your video, you can use tools, and iSpring is a good example of tools that you can use where you can embed that video with interactive elements. So it's not just all watching. There's watching with periodic answering questions, doing things within the video. Videos need to be kept short. Mix it up a bit with reading, videos, and activities. There still should be interactivity. There should be engagement. Maybe there is AI tools. Maybe you get them asking ChatGPT about stuff. Mix it up. Keep it interesting. Set that class culture. And once that class culture gets going, that's a really powerful thing. That makes all the difference on students continuing, because if you are a student and you come in, and I mean, at one point I think there was nearly 100 students. If 90 of them had done the pre-class activity, then that culture was there, and the rest eventually did, and eventually it was pretty much everyone. And the reason I've got little Connor in there is, in that first semester where I was doing this, I was recording a video, and the video I thought was pretty good. And then he walked in, he did kind of what he did there, and he let out a really giant meow right in the middle of my video. And I just didn't want to go back and re-record it. It was good other than that. And it's like, no, it's there, that's fine. Came in for the class that week, and the students wanted to know about the cat. I got all sorts of questions, and they wanted to know all about him and how old he was, and he was so cute, and did I have any more pictures of him? And so he became the guest star of my classes. And in fact, I would even do things like in the LMS, when you finished an activity, it would open up like a little hidden portal. Here's a folder with some cat pictures. And in fact, actually, here he is right now. He's now 19. By the time I finish this webinar, my lap is going to be well and truly furry. But that got them hooked. Sometimes it's just little stuff. I would sometimes do just like little Easter eggs, little things. I mean, really, there's no need for that to be in there, but there was just a little Easter egg. They got excited. They wanted to listen to it. They're like, oh, did you listen to the video? Was Connor in the video? Oh, I heard him out. Oh, maybe there was something else. Just little stuff like that. And yeah, just as Steph said there, created that moment between you and the learner. And you've kind of then also opened yourself up a little bit. You're not just that person at the front of the classroom that's going to do this, mark their exam and give them a grade at the end. You've got that more learning relationship between the two of you. So I think the class culture, having the value, really mixing it up, making the most of the tools that you have. Okay, in class. So this is where there's going to be a fair bit of variability, and certainly I'm going to dive into much more detail in the next webinar into some of this in class with some really specific examples. So the way that this particular class had been structured, we had one big lecture type class, everyone in the same room, 90, 100 students, and then several repeats of a 2-hour smaller block, which quite often it's the other way around. I got this and I just worked kind of with what I had. In that 1-hour class, I did a recap. It was a great opportunity for me to say, okay, what were the bits that didn't make sense to you? We can do recaps. I can take questions, requests of the particular focus topics. I knew the subject very well, and so that was a big advantage. And this is something that you wouldn't first time through flipped classroom necessarily want to do. Was that for most of the topics, I was able to make up pretty good examples on the fly because I knew the content very, very well. That's not always going to be the case. And if you're experienced in whatever you're teaching, you probably know the things they're not so sure about anyway. So you certainly can come in prepared with, here's the 3 most common things that people don't understand for this particular week. And whichever one of these 3 the class kind of collectively is lets me know that they want more help with, that's what we'll focus on. But we're making it really dynamic. Probably smaller activities. And then in that 2-hour class, it was smaller groups. So maybe 20 to 30 times 3 of those. So kind of your traditional tutorial. With those, I had the students doing a lot more small group activity, and there'd be just 1 to 2 really big kind of chunkier things. Write a survey about this, do kind of a piece of analysis, prepare a presentation that would go to a client, something that was pretty big and chunky. And they worked on that pretty much that whole time with me circulating, giving feedback, helping them. Sometimes they would present to each other, get feedback from each other, things like that. The exact dynamics of how you do that is going to vary depending on the size and shape of your classrooms, how many students you have, what kind of topics. But that was kind of the basics of what I was doing. With survey research, it was nice that I could double up on tools that were the teaching tools were also part of the topic. And so what I mean by that is, say, something like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, I could use it for the in-class testing them on something, but then we could open up the back end of it and see what the surveyor sees. And so we could actually have, it's a Qualtrics lesson, but it was also a whatever the other part of the topic lesson was. There was lots of double value of the thing that I was teaching was also the tools of the teaching could also double up as the content of the teaching. And so that was really helpful. But everything with all of this was very much about that maximum value of me and the students together, them asking things, me giving feedback, me adapting what we're doing to suit their needs. In other subjects, say in finance subjects, if you've taught all the finance theory through that pre-class activity, then in class you can be talking about what's happening in the markets this week. We saw this happen. Let's dive into that. So you can be very, if you're teaching any kind of subject where news or current events play a part, then you can have more time for that with the in-class because you're not, it's not competing with the bits and pieces that always stay the same. The interest rates and the time value of money, that's always the same. So that can be pre-class, they can have practice and activity. Then we can turn the in-class into the interacting and seeing it more dynamically, seeing it related to the real world. Okay. Okay, welcome, latecomer. You missed the cat, but he might make another appearance. He's snoozing. Okay, so it was really important for me. I was trying this, but I really wanted to get a proper gauge of whether this was effective teaching, and so I set up research surveys in addition to the regular student satisfaction surveys. And then there was also things like the passing and failing. And so post flipping the classroom, halved the fail rate. Here in Australia, in higher education, high distinctions and distinctions are the 2 top grades. Below that, you've got credits and passes. And so not only was it cutting down on the people failing, but there was really big jumps in the distinctions and high distinctions. So went from students either failing or just scraping through, to really students doing particularly well. And it's a little bit hard where it was also a new lecturer, and there was other changes in there, but the flipped classroom was the really big one. Um, and I'm sure if we asked the students, I mean, there was actually a couple of repeating students. My assessments were harder. I assess hard, I mean. And so despite more rigorous assessment, the student success was just night and day. And you saw that from the student engagement, you saw that from the students coming to class. So they were putting in that much more work, they were taking it all on board, and they were producing great work as a result. So I did a research survey, and 75% of the students either agreed or strongly agreed that the flipped classroom was better than kind of that traditional style. 24% didn't care. You could do whatever. You could sing and dance and play the piano. That was fine. They were neutral. That's all right. And it was interesting that there was 1% who said, "Nah, no, thank you. This is worse than." And I've got regular in quotes because that was their phrase, not mine. And I think that was quite a telling phrase of regular really was highlighting expectation. So I mean, with a lot of life, norms and expectations play a big part. And if you have kind of particular expectations of, I come into my class and you talk at me, and maybe I listen a bit, and then I do some assessments, and that's learning, then this can be a bit of a shock to the system. So I think building an expectation, and I think maybe I had a little bit of a reputation as being a little bit crazy anyway. So, but that expectation was, I think, really important. We had some qualitative comments, and so the being able to learn theory beforehand and then apply the theory was really beneficial. Definitely got a lot of comments like this. I was actually motivated to come to lectures. So that's a the first part of that sentence is not something you necessarily see often. Since I knew it wouldn't be someone talking to me an hour, and I'd have discussion about things I'd already studied. So again, that really that really seeing the value, having that engagement. And Sana's made a really good comment there about that class culture, and that definitely, that the students that kind of aren't opting in immediately versus the ones that are, as you build that culture, more and more of them will. That was something I didn't mention with the in-class activities, was you want to build it so that if someone hasn't done their pre-class work, they will struggle, but they can still do it. Because what you don't want is someone to go, "I didn't do my pre-class, I won't bother going to the in-class," because then you get a lose-lose. So really important that you're building it so that they see the value of the pre-class and how that stacks on top of the in-class, but there's just enough there that someone, and it might be just by doing recaps or summaries, or possibly group activities, being a little bit strategic with how you're grouping people for group activities, so that if someone hasn't done the pre-class, they will still come to class and they will still get something out of it, but they will also realize how much more they would get out of it. Um, how much more they would get out of it if they were doing that pre-class. So how long did it take for the class culture? That day one, and selling this to them on day one, was the vital thing, because that really built it from the outset. So day one, this is how we're doing, this is what we're doing, build it, them setting those expectations, so that by the time we got to week 2, they knew that before that next one, that week 2, there was things they needed to do. Used the LMS, made sure that there was comments there, a little bit of follow-up. I could see people that hadn't logged in, little bit of follow-up there. Hey, just remember, here's the things to do before the class. It's going to be important. So that culture building starts day one, and the stronger you get it early, the stronger it will be over time. So Tatiana's question about the flipped versus traditional. So like I was saying before, definitely don't want to just do flipped as like a one-off class, because you won't have that culture. I would maybe think about kind of it as meters. You might have percentage of me versus percentage of student, and maybe week to week there's a little bit of changing it up and down. But I would think about it more as kind of, here's my paradigm, I'm going to adjust up and down kind of a little bit, depending on, maybe there's sometimes where I do need to talk a little bit more. Okay, one more student comment. Lectures are for being spoken at, not for activities. So I don't know if that was the same person that wanted the regular teaching, none of this wacky flipped stuff. But again, we can see there is going to be some people that have those expectations. Okay, kind of mindful of time, because I do want us to have some Q&A at the end. So just really quickly on published research. There is a reasonable chunk of published research now, because Flipped Classroom has been around for a while. This screenshot here is from an AI app called Consensus, and it will do a bit of a meta-analysis. It'll find the top papers. It'll tell you whether a statement, and my statement was flipped classroom is effective, or something along those lines. And we can see that it was pretty much all yeses, with I think maybe a possibly in there. My view on the published research is that there was 3 waves. First wave was people like me, adopted it really early. They were very positive about it. Second wave, all of a sudden there was a lot of papers that got a lot more negative. And I think the reason for that is there was a wave of flipped classroom became quite popular and trendy, and it got forced on people. And so you had people who were teaching that didn't want to teach that way. They didn't do a good job of it. They told the students, I'm teaching you like this because I have to. I don't like it. You won't like it. And that translated into this research where it was more negative. And sometimes the student success was okay, but the satisfaction was going down. And so my view is that we went from that positive to the negative. And now if we look at the meta-analyses and we look at the more recent studies, it's certainly back to more positive, where we've kind of had that wave of people being forced to do flipped classroom, and not being sold on it, not agreeing. And really that translated into how they are with their students. And I think we've kind of come back around to it being predominantly positive now. Okay, some tips before we get into the tools. So tips for delivery. Really anything we do in education, hopefully those of you who are educators, this is all things that you would be doing anyway, but making sure the pre-class are engaging, make sure it's realistic. 3-hour video, not realistic. Reading a whole book, not realistic. It's got to be things that the students will do and are capable of doing. So want it to be interesting, want it to be realistic. It's a really great opportunity to kind of channel that passion you have for your subject. So you're going back, you're looking at your resources again, and hopefully most of you are teaching something that you like. And if you are, then hopefully this was just going back, looking at your materials, remembering why you love the subject, using that as a way to personalize, hopefully get some of your enthusiasm back, translate that into your teaching. If you are part of a team and you can do this as a team, so you're not having to do it all by yourself, that's going to be really helpful. In-class polling is excellent. It's a great way, especially for big groups. But tip, don't let anyone send free text directly to the screen. Even if they are adults or grown-ups or doctors, don't let people text stuff that's going to go directly up on the screen behind you without you having moderated. Otherwise, you will get all sorts of creative things. Last one, technical tip, get a reasonable quality microphone and place it correctly. So you don't need to spend a ton of money, but if you're making any kind of video or audio content, even if your camera's not amazing, you want the sound quality to be enough that people are going to listen. This is kind of slightly cut off. So here I've got a Shure MV7, which is the USB version of the Shure mic that you would see most podcasters and YouTubers use. But there's certainly a few cheaper options, things like the Audio Technica. You saw the picture of the cat with the snowball mic. That's probably about the bottom level of what you can get away with. And then when you're recording, you probably want kind of about kind of a 30 centimeter, maybe a kind of hand width gap from your mouth to the mic. If it's too far away, then it's going to kind of be quite quiet and echoey. If it's too close, then it's just going to kind of really blast people. It's going to clip because you'll be too loud for it. So this is a little technical tip. And we've got a couple of slides just mentioning a few tools. And so certainly big thanks to iSpring. iSpring have sponsored this webinar today. And iSpring is something that I guess even if this wasn't a sponsored session, I would be mentioning because I think they certainly fall nicely into a couple of the different things that you might be using for your flipped classroom, whether it's the pre-class or the in-class, but particularly the pre-class stuff. Is iSpring free? I'll let the iSpring people answer that. I think they might have a free trial for you at the end. So I've listed a number of different tools there, depending on where you work, depending on what gets provided to you. Some of these are free, some of these are paid, some of these are kind of freemium, where there's the free tier and then there's the you pay and you get something that's a bit better. And you kind of figure out which of these makes sense. Are these tools in-house tools? Not quite sure what you mean there. Most of these, OBS is a freebie. Most of the rest, though, are just companies that make these tools. So screen recording, we want to be able to record videos that probably involve some sort of PowerPoints, maybe you speaking. Really important that it's nice and clear. Even just your modern cell phone does a pretty reasonable job of the video. Do think about how you appear, do think about how you sound. At one point, I was a learning developer. We had an academic and he shot some video. For some reason, he decided he wanted to sit in his bedroom on his bed, which wasn't made. I wasn't quite sure if they were pants or underpants or quite what he was wearing, but it wasn't quite enough clothes. On the wall of his bedroom was some exotic art, if we can call it that. And we had to send all his videos back and say, look, can you please do these again? Wearing pants with no art, not in the background. So kind of do think about the environment. Do think about what's where you're filming. But yeah, I think we could certainly some of these I will dive into in the future kind of bottom up session. So iSpring, for those that aren't familiar with iSpring, basically you download it and it comes up in PowerPoint, and basically it's another item on the ribbon in PowerPoint. Anyone that knows how to use PowerPoint is immediately going to be pretty okay with using it. And so that's one of the reasons that I really like it, and one of the reasons that I was very happy to come along and present for iSpring is that if you are getting people to try and do learning design for the first time, some of those tools are really clunky. This is pretty intuitive. It just sits there inside of PowerPoint, lets you do a number of different things. You can do quizzes, you can make little interactive stuff. You can actually kind of build a whole course on it. I will give you a couple of examples there. You can make that kind of SCORM package, that HR style kind of material narration they do. If you have a script, they've even got AI text to speech, so you don't even need to record speech for it. If you're worried about kind of being understandable, or accents or things like that. Also pictured there on my YouTube channel, I've shot just a couple of short videos just as primers on how to build an online course. So the real basics of getting started. And Kate is linking up there. So the iSpring site has lots of amazing examples as well. So just a bit of information there, but really, and we can see Kate has shared a 14-day free trial, which is very nice of iSpring to have shared with you. I'm not sure on the dates. They did have a build a course competition going as well. Kate might be able to fill us in if that is still running or not. But certainly in terms of if you're trying to do learning design, or if you are that tier above and maybe you're managing a department, you're trying to get multiple people doing it, they have editing via the cloud, so you can edit together. The learning curve is just so much lower being embedded within PowerPoint. Can do quizzes, can do screen recording, it can do text to speech. Yeah, I think that's kind of most of the key points there, and you can learn a whole lot more from their web page. I will leave iSpring to answer questions about copyright protection. So I managed to accelerate us in within the hour, just so that we have a few minutes left for questions. I know that we saved one way back.
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much, Lyndon, for your presentation. That was great. I think our participants got a lot of new ideas for flipped classroom, and I'm sure cat lovers will use the one about Connor. So yeah. And now let's see. Yeah, what questions do we have? I've saved a couple of them. So yeah, there was a question about AI from Salima. So
Yes.
how you manage the use of AI tools for homework activities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of AI, and if you do check out my YouTube channel, there is lots of AI content on there, all sorts of different tools. It is a reality of the workplace that, I mean, just my workplace. I'm currently helping to develop AI policy to make sure people are using AI in safe and sensible ways. I would be doing that with my learners, making sure it's very clear when it's appropriate and not appropriate. But if I were teaching a stats class right now, I would have students getting R code out of either ChatGPT or Claude, and then evaluating it, figuring out whether you could write it differently. Yeah, like definitely making the most of those AI tools in terms of something that's great and interactive for students, something that hopefully can help you as well with developing um, developing your materials as well. Although please do make sure you proofread it and don't be one of those people that still has little chat GPT headers in amongst it. The time here is just coming up 9 p.m. I'm in Melbourne in Australia. Someone asked about whether I have flipped classroom videos on YouTube. There is a couple. They are excerpts from a Skillshare course that I did a few years ago. Some of it is similar to what you've seen tonight. I'm somewhat embarrassed by both the haircut and the microphone I was using, so I'm not sure if I will overly promote it. So that was that one that we just popped up then. Scrolling back, I like the comment, think like a cat, so comfort and results.
Yeah, I also
Definitely.
like the comments.
Yeah, no, this has been great. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending. Thanks, everyone, for being very interactive in the comments. I think with the webinar, you get to see us. We don't get to see you other than what's happening in the comments. So a dead and empty comment section is a bit of a harder going in the webinar. Do you have a traditional classroom, especially for some topics? Well, I mean, I guess for some people, I mean, some people do love speaking, but there's other avenues for that. I mean, you can go to conferences, you can do things. I mean, to me, even before I was doing stuff that I would call flipped classroom, my classes from day one of when I started teaching were interactive. So it would be I was teaching statistics or finance. It was things that always had a doing element. We would have me demonstrating and then students doing. So even before I was really pushing that pre-class bit, it was already interactive. So I think that active learning, engaged learners, and this is just a paradigm that really helps to push that. And I think you can always go and join if you want to just make speeches. You can always just join Toastmasters or start a YouTube channel, and you can just talk to the camera to your heart's content. In a nutshell, what is the power of the classroom? Oh, it wasn't a question; it was a statement. The power is you. Yes. Absolutely. I think whilst I thought that was a question coming through, I think Paula's statement there is absolutely correct. You and your ability to engage with learners, and I think the more that you do, just however much, I mean, and I can remember when I was working in university, and there was people that loved being sage on the stage and getting and just talking at people, and I mean, they were normally a fraction as funny as they thought they were, but they like that was the thing they really loved. But actually, once you start interacting with the students and it's a two-way thing, like I think that's even more enjoyable.
I
Did you
think
miss
there
out on? Oh,
there
no,
yeah,
yeah, no,
there's a
there was a
question.
good question there. Post class activities. Um, that's a good. Yeah, with that particular subject, I didn't. I was hitting them hard enough with the pre-class that the kind of, I guess, the following pre-class was kind of also the post-class. It just built week into week into week. So I didn't really have a thing that I called post-class, but I think that's an excellent question, because I think sometimes where you're teaching, particularly if you're teaching a subject with very discrete elements, you would think more about post-class than what I did and what I talked about today, because the whole course was survey, like this week we're doing surveys, next week we're doing a different bit of surveys, but it flowed week to week to week. Then it didn't, I didn't have as much of that post class. But yeah, thank you, Sonia. Excellent question. I would incorporate everything that includes feedback, metacognition, and teaching training. Yes. Any
There's a
YouTube
question, yeah, from
Yep.
Rebecca about YouTube
Um,
resources.
it's a good question, and I actually honestly haven't looked. I mean, you can normally find most stuff on YouTube, so hopefully, yes, excellent question. Maybe some homework. It's my pre-class for the next webinar, or post-class for this webinar, just to go and see if there's some good
Yeah.
YouTube resources to share.
I think there was also a question. Um, what happens in the class when some students have done their pre-class activities and some haven't? How do you address both groups at the same time? So maybe
Yeah.
some strategies. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So I think knowing what that balance is probably affects it a bit. If it's most have, a few haven't, then you might have maybe a few more group activities. The ones that haven't are getting grouped with the ones that have. So the ones that have are kind of helping the ones that haven't along. But at the same time, they are becoming kind of the exemplars for the ones that haven't, to go, oh, actually, I should be more like this person. Look how much easier it is for this other person. That'll help me along. If the majority hadn't, then it gets a lot harder. And that's where really getting that culture right from the outset is important. Um, then I would try and have a recap and try and have activities they are going to be able to do, but really see how I can push for the next week and the next activity for some improvement there.
Yeah, thank you for shedding the light on this question. Um, yeah. So yeah, I'm scrolling the chat to see if we missed some questions. So yeah,
I think they've been
uh,
pretty good.
yeah, maybe yeah, there is some more, but still, if you have some questions in the future, maybe Lyndon, you can share some like your contacts so people can like um
Yeah,
can ask
yeah, yeah,
questions
yeah,
later.
absolutely. Yeah, Dr. Lyndon Walker, YouTube or LinkedIn are probably the two places to go and find me. I mean, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, certainly happy to get questions and interact there. The YouTube channel is mostly AI, a bit of kind of statistics in R for those that are familiar with stat software, and some other random research things and whatever takes my fancy. Um, Reference links, absolutely. And the slides, I'm certainly very happy for those to be available to everyone. So everything that's in the slides is there for people to have.
Yeah, we
Um,
will share the slides in the emails, the post webinar emails, and along with the recording. So yeah, you will surely find all the info that we shared today. And also, if you have some questions about iSpring or like some questions for Lyndon, and we can pass it, you can write always to our email. I've shared it in the chat. And I think we can wrap up this session. So, Lyndon, thank you again for sharing all these insights with us and being so passionate about it.
yep.
And thank you, everyone, for being such an attentive audience. I appreciate all your comments and feedback in the chat. So, yeah, hope you have enjoyed. Take care and see you next time.
Great. Thanks, everyone.